For 50 years, I watched my husband Arthur place fresh lilacs on the grave of a woman he loved before me. I never questioned it until I found the hidden journals that revealed her true identity. The woman I'd spent half a century competing with wasn't his first love at all. She was his sister, and the truth would unravel everything I thought I knew about our marriage. It began on our 50th wedding anniversary. Arthur and I had settled into our usual morning routine, him with his crossword puzzle, me preparing a special breakfast to mark the occasion. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. At 73, Arthur still maintained the straight posture and dignified manner that had first drawn me to him all those decades ago. His hands, once steady and strong, now showed prominent veins and age spots, but his eyes remained the same, deep blue and perpetually holding something back. "I made your favorite," I said, setting down a plate of blueberry pancakes in front of him. "And don't forget we have dinner reservations at 6. Arthur looked up, momentarily confused. Then his expression cleared. 50 years, he said with a small smile. "How did we get here so quickly, Laurel?" I leaned down to kiss his temple, inhaling the familiar scent of his aftershave, the same brand he'd used our entire marriage. "One day at a time, my dear." I turned back to the stove. I caught sight of Arthur discreetly checking his watch. I knew what that meant. Third Thursday of the month, his standing appointment with the dead. "You're going to visit Crystal today?" I kept my voice neutral, the way I had for 5 decades whenever I mentioned her name. Arthur nodded, folding his newspaper carefully. "Just for a little while. I'll be back in time to change for dinner." I forced a smile. "Of course. Give her my regards." It was the same exchange we'd had hundreds of times before. The visits to Crystal's grave had been part of our marriage from the beginning, a non-negotiable ritual that I had come to accept, if never quite understand. Arthur had told me only the basics. Crystal had died young, tragically. They had been deeply in love. He had never fully recovered. I'd seen a single photograph of her once, a beautiful young woman with striking features and an enigmatic smile. Arthur kept it locked in his desk drawer, along with whatever memories he couldn't bring himself to share with me. "I can explain," I said, though I was the one who deserved explanations. Arthur stepped into the room slowly, as if approaching a wild animal. His face had aged 10 years in 10 seconds. The carefully maintained composure he'd worn for decades now completely shattered. He looked at the open journals scattered on the floor, at the photograph still sitting on the small table, and then back at me. "You weren't supposed to find this," he whispered. "Clearly," I replied, surprising myself with the edge in my voice. 50 years, Arthur. 50 years of letting me believe she was someone you loved romantically. 50 years of watching me try to compete with a ghost." He sank into his leather chair, suddenly looking every one of his 73 years. "Is that what you thought? All this time? What was I supposed to think?" I held up the journal in my hands. "You never told me she was your sister. You let me believe—" "I never said she was anything else," he interrupted, a flash of defensiveness in his eyes. "You never corrected my assumptions either." I moved to stand directly in front of him. "When we were dating, and I asked about the photograph in your wallet, you said she was someone you loved very much who died. When I asked if she was your girlfriend, you just said, 'It was complicated.' You've been visiting her grave monthly for our entire marriage, bringing her favorite flowers." What was I supposed to think? Arthur's shoulders slumped. "I didn't realize. I never meant to make you feel second best." I laughed, a short, bitter sound that surprised us both. "I've spent 50 years living with her ghost between us, wondering what she had that I didn't, wondering if you would have married her instead if she had lived." He flinched at that, and for a moment, I regretted my harshness. But 50 years of built-up questions couldn't be contained any longer. Why, Arthur? Why keep this secret? Why hide who she really was? He was silent for so long, I thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost a whisper. Because talking about her as my sister meant talking about her death. About what happened. About how I failed her. His hands trembled as he reached for one of the journals. It was easier to let people think she was someone I'd loved and lost romantically. It fit into a narrative everyone understood. The one who got away. No one questioned it. No one asked for details. I'm not everyone, Arthur. I'm your wife. He met my eyes then, and the raw pain I saw there made my breath catch. I know, and I should have told you. But by the time I realized what you believed, we'd been married for years. How could I explain that I'd let you misunderstand something so fundamental for so long? I sank down onto the ottoman across from him, suddenly exhausted. So instead, you built a secret room, hid all evidence of who she really was, continued to let me believe a lie for half a century. Arthur nodded, his eyes downcast. It became easier to maintain the deception than to correct it. And then, he gestured helplessly at the room around us. Time passed. Our children were born. Life moved forward. But I couldn't let her go. I couldn't stop visiting her. I couldn't stop writing to her in these journals. It became my penance. Penance? For what? For surviving? His head snapped up, surprise evident in his expression. You read that much. Enough to know she was your twin, that she died of leukemia when you were both 23, that she made you promise to live fully. I leaned forward. What I don't understand is why you've spent 50 years punishing yourself, and by extension, me, for surviving. Arthur stood up abruptly, moving to the hidden room. He returned with another journal, this one with a dark blue cover, unmarked by a date. He held it out to me, his hand visibly shaking. Because it wasn't just that she died and I lived, he said quietly. It's that she died because of me. I took the journal cautiously, opening it to find not Arthur's familiar handwriting, but a more delicate script. Crystal's diary. Read the entry for March 10th, 1972, Arthur said, his voice hollow. I turned the pages carefully until I found the date. March 10th, 1972. The doctor confirmed what I've suspected for weeks now. The cancer has returned, more aggressive than before. When I asked about options, he wouldn't meet my eyes. Arthur doesn't know yet. How do I tell my twin that while his life is just beginning, mine is ending? He's finally been accepted to grad school, his future stretching bright before him. I can't bear to be the shadow that dims his light again. Perhaps it would have been different if I'd gone to the clinic when the symptoms first appeared. But I was so determined to see Arthur through his finals, to help him prepare his graduate school applications. I kept telling myself it was just fatigue, just stress, just the lingering effects of the first bout. By the time I couldn't ignore it anymore, I made my choice. I don't regret putting his future first. I just wish we had more time. I looked up at Arthur, confusion clouding my understanding. She delayed seeking treatment because of your finals? Your graduate school applications? That's hardly your fault, Arthur. He took the diary from my hands, turning to a later entry. Keep reading. April 25th, 1972. Arthur discovered something today that I never wanted him to know. He found the letter from Dr. Phillips urging me to come in immediately, dated from January. He was devastated, demanding to know why I waited almost 3 months to seek treatment. I couldn't lie to him. I told him about the bone marrow transplant. I was offered in January, how I turned it down because he would have been the donor, and the recovery would have meant him missing his critical semester, losing his scholarships, delaying grad school. He stormed out in tears. I'm afraid of what he'll do. My sweet, responsible brother has always carried the weight of the world. Now he'll try to carry mine, too. not understanding that some burdens can't be shared. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. My hand flew to my mouth. She refused a transplant that might have saved her life. Because of your education? Arthur nodded, his face a mask of decades-old grief. My twin sister died because she didn't want to disrupt my life. She chose my future over her own. His voice broke. How does someone live with that knowledge? I finally understood. The monthly visits, the hidden grief, the journals, they weren't just about mourning a beloved sister. They were about carrying an unbearable guilt, a debt Arthur felt could never be repaid. She made her choice, Arthur, I said gently. You didn't know. I should have, he replied. The words weighted with 50 years of self-recrimination. I knew something was wrong. I saw how tired she was, how she'd lost weight. But I was so caught up in my own ambitions, my own plans. I didn't push hard enough. I didn't insist she see a doctor. He took the diary back, closing it with reverent care. So now you know. Every month for 50 years, I visited her grave not just because I miss her, but because I owe her the life I've lived. Every accomplishment, every joy, they should have been hers too. I looked at the man I'd been married to for half a century, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time. Not emotionally unavailable, not pining for a lost love, but drowning in guilt, carrying a burden he had never been meant to bear. And our life together? I asked quietly. Was that just part of your penance too? Arthur's eyes widened in genuine shock. No, Laurel. Never that. He reached for my hand. Meeting you was the first time I felt I might be able to keep my promise to her, to truly live, to find joy again. As his fingers touched mine, I pulled away, not ready for reconciliation. The truth had been revealed, but 50 years of misunderstanding couldn't be erased in a single conversation. I need time to process this, I said, standing up. You've had 50 years with this truth. I've had less than an hour. I moved toward the door, pausing at the threshold. I'm going to take a walk. When I come back, we're going to talk, really talk, about Crystal, about who she was, about all the things you should have shared with me decades ago. Arthur nodded, resignation and something like relief washing over his face. I'll be here. As I closed the study door behind me, I felt strangely light despite the weight of all I'd learned. The woman I'd spent half a century competing with wasn't a romantic rival. She was family I'd never been allowed to know. The mystery that had shadowed our marriage had finally stepped into the light, and with that revelation came a question I wasn't yet ready to answer. Now that I knew the truth about Crystal, what did it mean for the truth of my marriage? For 50 years, I had been a good wife. I had raised our 3 children, maintained our home, supported Arthur through his career as a university professor, and never, not once, had I complained about sharing him with a ghost. I told myself it was a small price to pay for an otherwise devoted husband. But something about this anniversary felt different. 50 years of playing second fiddle to a memory suddenly seemed like too much to bear. After Arthur left, I poured myself a second cup of coffee and wandered into his study, a room that had always been his sanctuary. His absence felt palpable in the leather chair where he spent hours reading, in the carefully arranged books on shelves that stretched from floor to ceiling, in the faint scent of pipe tobacco that lingered despite the fact that he'd quit smoking 20 years ago. I ran my fingers along his desk, the mahogany surface polished to a high shine. How many times had I dusted this room while never truly exploring it? How many times had I respected his privacy at the expense of my own peace of mind? Without conscious decision, I found myself trying the small drawer where he kept her photograph. Locked, as always. The key was on his keychain, which never left his possession. I stood there, hand still on the drawer pull, feeling foolish and slightly ashamed. What was I doing? After 50 years, what did I hope to discover? I was about to leave when my eyes caught on something unusual, a slight gap between the bookcase and the wall. I might never have noticed it if the morning light hadn't cast just the right shadow. Curious, I moved closer and peered into the gap. There appeared to be a small space behind the bookcase. My heart began to race as I pushed against the heavy shelving unit. It moved more easily than expected, revealing a narrow door built into the wall, a door that had been deliberately concealed. Stood frozen, staring at this secret entrance in our home of 45 years. My first instinct was to push the bookcase back, to pretend I'd never seen it. But 50 years of unanswered questions propelled me forward. With trembling fingers, I turned the simple metal knob. The door opened with a soft creak onto a small room, more of a closet, really, illuminated only by the light spilling in from the study. Shelves lined the walls, each filled with leather-bound journals, stacked chronologically with dates carefully marked on their spines. In the center stood a small table bearing a silver frame I'd never seen before. A photograph of Arthur, much younger, with his arm around a young woman. Crystal. But this wasn't the photograph I'd glimpsed before. In this image, they were both laughing, their posture relaxed and intimate. Arthur looked happier than I'd ever seen him, his eyes crinkled at the corners, his smile uninhibited in a way it had never been with me. My knees weakened, and I sank to the floor, the photograph still clutched in my hands. 50 years of suspecting I was competing with a ghost, and now I held tangible proof. I felt a lifetime of insecurity crystallize into a single painful moment of clarity. With shaking hands, I reached for one of the journals, the earliest one, dated 3 years before Arthur and I had met. I told myself I would just look at one. Entry, just try to understand what hold this woman still had on my husband after all these years. The journal fell open to a page marked with a pressed lilac flower, the same flowers Arthur brought to her grave each month. I began to read. April 18, 1972, Crystal insisted on going to the lake today, despite the doctor's warnings about overexertion. If these are my last days, she said, I won't spend them locked inside. I couldn't deny her, even though each step she took terrified me. We sat by the water for hours, talking about what might have been. She made me promise again. No mourning, no guilt, a full life lived for both of us. How can I promise such a thing when the thought of a world without her feels impossible to bear? Mother and father refuse to discuss what comes next, as if silence might somehow prevent the inevitable. I froze, reading the last line again. Mother and father? My fingers fumbled through the pages, scanning rapidly for answers. Another entry caught my eye. May 2nd, 1972. The treatments have failed. Dr. Reynolds says it's a matter of weeks now, perhaps a month if we're fortunate. Crystal just nodded when they told her, calm in a way that makes my heart break. Later, when we were alone, she took my hand and said, Promise me you won't let this define your life, Arthur. Promise me you'll find someone to love, someone who makes you happy. How can she ask this of me? She's not just my sister. She's my twin, my other half. When she goes, she takes part of me with her. Sister, not lover. Sister. The room seemed to tilt around me as 50 years of assumptions crumbled. I grabbed another journal, then another, reading frantically, piecing together the story Arthur had never told me. Crystal, his twin sister, brilliant and vibrant, diagnosed with leukemia at 22. Her rapid decline, her death just before their 23rd birthday. The devastation it left in its wake. The promise he had made to live fully in her absence. And most shocking of all, Arthur's guilt that he had survived when she hadn't. That he had gone on to have the life they had, both dreamed of. Every visit to her grave wasn't about clinging to a past love. It was about honoring the promise he had made to his dying sister. I sat surrounded by decades of Arthur's private grief, my mind reeling. For 50 years, I had been jealous of a ghost who wasn't a romantic rival at all. For 50 years, I had resented these visits without understanding what they truly meant. For 50 years, Arthur had carried this pain alone, never sharing the full truth of who Crystal was. Who he was. The sound of the front door closing jolted me back to the present. Arthur was home, hours earlier than expected. I scrambled to my feet, still clutching one of the journals, panic rising in my throat. How could I explain my intrusion into this sacred, secret space? How could I face him knowing I had uncovered the truth he had kept hidden for our entire marriage? Heavy footsteps approached the study. There was no time to replace everything, no time to conceal what I had discovered. I stepped out from behind the bookcase, journal in hand, just as Arthur appeared in the doorway. He stopped abruptly, his face draining of color as his eyes moved from me to the open secret door, to the journal I held. For a moment, we simply stared at each other, the weight of 50 years and unspoken truths hanging in the air between us. "Laurel," he whispered, his voice breaking. "What have you done?" The mid-afternoon sun warmed my face as I walked through our neighborhood. 50 years in the same house meant I knew every crack in the sidewalk, every flowering bush, every mailbox. Like my marriage, this landscape had become so familiar, I'd stopped truly seeing it. Now, with each step, I found myself noticing details I'd overlooked for decades, much like the truth about Crystal that had been hiding in plain sight. Our suburban street was quiet at this hour, most neighbors either still at work or napping. Behind drawn curtains, I had no particular destination in mind. I simply needed space to breathe, to think, to reconsider 5 decades of life with Arthur in light of what I now knew. Before today, my understanding of our marriage had been straightforward. We met when I was 24 and Arthur 28, introduced by mutual friends at a university faculty party. I was a newly hired librarian. He was finishing his PhD in literature. There was nothing dramatic about our courtship, just a steady, comfortable progression toward partnership. 6 months of dating, a year-long engagement, a modest wedding in his parents' backyard. I'd known from the beginning about his monthly visits to a grave. He'd been upfront about that at least, though never about who Crystal truly was to him. When I asked early in our relationship, he'd been vague. I'd filled in the blanks myself, crafting a narrative about passionate young love cut short by tragedy. Arthur had never corrected me. Now, walking past the Henderson house with its meticulously maintained roses, I wondered if I'd been complicit in my own deception. Had I preferred the romantic tragedy I'd invented to a more complex truth? Had I avoided pressing for details? Because I feared what I might learn, I found myself at the small community park 3 blocks from our home. I sat on a bench overlooking the duck pond, the same bench where Arthur had proposed 50 years earlier. He'd been nervous, dropping the ring in the grass and spending 10 frantic minutes searching for it while I pretended not to notice his distress. When he finally found it and dropped to one knee, his proposal had been simple. "Laurel, I never thought I'd find happiness again. Will you marry me?" At the time, I'd assumed "again" referred to his relationship with Crystal. Now I understood he meant happiness after losing his twin, his other half. A young mother pushed a stroller past me, nodding a polite greeting. I smiled automatically in return, my mind still sifting through memories, re-examining them with new understanding. Our wedding had been lovely but subdued. Arthur's parents were reserved people who kept conversation to a minimum. They never spoke of Crystal, and following their lead, neither did I. Now I wondered if their silence had been born of the same guilt Arthur carried. Had they too blamed themselves for not noticing their daughter's illness sooner? The early years of our marriage had been focused on building careers and a home. Arthur threw himself into his research with single-minded dedication, publishing prolifically and earning tenure at the university by 35. I had advanced from librarian to head of the university's special collections, a position I held until retirement. We'd had 3 children, Zach, Dolly, and Leo, each 2 years apart, all now with families of their own. We'd been good parents, I believed, present, loving, supportive. Arthur had coached Little League, helped with homework, attended every school play and concert. He'd been especially protective of Dolly, our only daughter, sometimes to the point of overprotectiveness. I'd attributed this to typical fatherly concern. Now I wondered if he saw echoes of Crystal in her. Month after month, year after year, Arthur had maintained his ritual visits to the cemetery across town. Sometimes, when the visits fell on weekends or holidays, he would ask if I wanted to accompany him. I always declined, convinced my presence would be an intrusion on his private mourning for a lost love. Had he wanted me there? Had he been reaching out, hoping I might help him carry his burden? Our children had asked about the visits when they were young. Arthur had told them he was visiting someone very special who died a long time ago. Like me, they had assumed a romantic connection and eventually stopped asking. The visits became background noise in our family life, a peculiarity we all accepted without question. As the children grew and left home, Arthur and I had settled into the comfortable routine of long married couples. We had our separate interests, his scholarly research, my community volunteer work, but also shared pleasures, travel, theater, our book club, Sunday dinners with whoever among our children, and grandchildren could attend. We were, by all outward appearances, a success story. 50 years of stable, contented partnership. Yet there had always been a part of Arthur I couldn't reach, a melancholy that descended without warning, an emotional reserve that no amount of love or time seemed to penetrate. I had attributed this to his nature, or perhaps to lingering attachment to Crystal the lover. Never had I imagined he was carrying the crushing weight of believing himself responsible for his twin sister's death. The sun was beginning to lower in the sky, lengthening shadows across the park. I checked my watch. I'd been walking and reminiscing for nearly 2 hours. Our anniversary dinner reservation was in 3 hours. The absurdity of it struck me suddenly. 50 years of marriage celebrated over candlelight and wine, all while a fundamental misunderstanding lay between us. I rose from the bench, my decision made. We would not be going to dinner tonight. Instead, we would finally, truly talk about Crystal, about the past, about the half-century we had spent together without ever fully knowing each other. As I walked home, I found myself wondering what Crystal had been like. What color were her eyes? Did she share Arthur's love of poetry, his methodical approach to problems? Did she laugh easily? What dreams had died with her at 23? I had spent 50 years resenting a woman I had never met, imagining her as a romantic rival who held a piece of my husband's heart that I could never claim. Now I felt a different emotion. Grief for the sister-in-law I never knew, the aunt my children never met, the woman who had sacrificed her life out of love for her twin. When our modest 2-story house came into view, I paused on the sidewalk, studying it as if seeing it for the first time. We had bought it as newlyweds, stretching our budget to afford the down payment. Arthur had insisted on this particular house despite several less expensive options being available. At the time, I'd attributed his preference to the home's classic architecture and spacious backyard. Now I wondered, had he chosen it because of the built-in bookcase in the study? Had he already been planning the hidden room where he would keep Crystal's memory alive? As I approached our front door, I noticed Arthur's silhouette through the living room window. He was sitting in his usual armchair, but his posture was different, hunched forward, head in hands, waiting, dreading, perhaps even hoping for the conversation we should have had decades ago. I took a deep breath and reached for the doorknob, ready to finally meet my husband. The real Arthur, not the carefully constructed version he had presented to the world. Ready to learn about the woman whose grave he had visited faithfully for 50 years. Ready to decide what our marriage would become now that the truth had come to light. As I stepped into the house, Arthur looked up, his face lined with anxiety, and something else. Relief, perhaps, that the burden of his secret would finally be shared. "Laurel," he said, his voice hoarse, "I've made some tea." Such an ordinary gesture for such an extraordinary moment. I nodded and closed the door behind me, crossing the threshold into the next chapter of our life together, whatever that might be. I sat across from Arthur at our kitchen table, the same table where we'd shared thousands of meals, helped our children with homework, played countless games of cards on rainy evenings. The familiarity of the setting stood in stark contrast to the strangeness of the moment. Between us sat a wooden box I'd never seen before. Arthur had retrieved it from the hidden room while I was making fresh tea, neither of us quite ready to begin the conversation that would change everything. "This belonged to Crystal," Arthur said finally, his fingers resting lightly on the box's carved lid. "I've kept it all these years." I wrapped my hands around my teacup, drawing comfort from its warmth. "Show me," I said quietly. "Show me who she was." Arthur nodded, opening the box with reverent care. Inside were photographs, letters, small mementos, the carefully preserved artifacts of a life cut short. He selected a photograph from the top of the pile and handed it to me. Two identical teenagers grinned at the camera, arms slung around each other's shoulders, standing before a cake with 18 candles. Their birthday. I studied the image intently. Arthur's face I knew so well, even this younger version. But seeing Crystal for the first time, truly seeing her, took my breath away. She was beautiful, yes, but what struck me most was the vitality that seemed to radiate from her even in this frozen moment. Her smile was wider than Arthur's, her stance more confident. Where his eyes showed a hint of shy reserve, hers sparkled with mischief and determination. "She was 3 minutes older," Arthur said, a faint smile touching his lips, "and never let me forget it." "Tell me about her," I said, setting the photograph on the table between us. "Not what happened at the end. Tell me who she was." Arthur took a deep breath, then began to speak. 50 years of carefully maintained silence broke like a dam, and words poured out, halting at first, then with increasing fluency as he described the sister he had adored. Crystal had been the bold one, the dreamer, the instigator. Where Arthur was thoughtful and cautious, she was impulsive and fearless. She'd wanted to be a photojournalist, to travel the world documenting important stories. She'd been accepted to several prestigious journalism programs before her first diagnosis at 21. "She beat it the first time," Arthur said, his voice softening. 8 months of brutal treatments, and she went into remission. We thought it was over. She was planning to start school the following fall. "What was she like during that first illness?" I asked. Arthur's eyes took on a distant look. Unstoppable. Even on her worst days, she had more life in her than most people at their best. She made friends with everyone in the treatment center. Patients, nurses, janitors. She started a photography project, portraits of other cancer patients. "Not as victims," she'd say, "but as warriors." He handed me another photograph. Crystal in a hospital bed, head wrapped in a colorful scarf, holding a camera and grinning defiantly at whoever was taking the picture. "She sounds remarkable," I said, meaning it. She was. Arthur reached for another item in the box, a small notebook with a worn leather cover. This was her idea journal. She was always plotting some new adventure, some project. Even when she could barely get out of bed, her mind was always racing ahead. As Arthur continued sharing memories, I found myself drawn into Crystal's world. Her fierce loyalty to her brother, her passion for photography, her determination to squeeze every drop of experience from life. The woman emerging from Arthur's Stories wasn't a rival. She was someone I wished I could have known. She would have liked you, Arthur said suddenly, looking up from a stack of Crystal's photographs he'd been showing me. She always told me I needed someone practical to balance me out, someone with both feet on the ground. The simple statement hit me with unexpected force. All these years, I'd imagined Crystal as an impossible standard I could never match. Now I wondered if she might have been my ally, my friend. "Why didn't you tell me, Arthur?" I asked, the question that had been burning inside me for hours. "Why let me believe she was a girlfriend?" Arthur set down the photographs, his expression troubled. "At first, it wasn't intentional. When we met, I was still deep in grief, but trying to honor her wish that I move forward. I mentioned visiting Crystal's grave, and you assumed. I didn't correct you because talking about her as my sister meant explaining everything. The guilt, the responsibility. And later, I pressed. After we were married? After we had children?" He looked down at his hands. "The longer I let the misunderstanding continue, the harder it became to correct it. And to be honest, there was a certain protection in letting people think she was a girlfriend I'd lost. People understand romantic grief. They respect it, give it space. The loss of a twin sister." He shook his head. "People expect you to get over it eventually. They don't understand that losing her was like losing half of myself." I considered this, trying to see it from his perspective. "But I'm not people, Arthur. I'm your wife." "I know," he said, guilt flashing across his face. "And that's the real reason, Laurel. The shameful one. I was afraid." "Afraid of what?" "That if I told you the truth about Crystal, about my guilt, about why I visit her grave, about why I keep her memory so close, you might try to help me move on." His voice cracked slightly. "And I don't deserve to move on. Not when she's gone because of me." The raw pain in his admission silenced me momentarily. For 50 years, my husband had carried this burden alone, believing he didn't deserve to be unburdened. For 50 years, he'd punished himself for a choice his sister had made out of love for him. "She wouldn't want this for you," I said finally. "From everything you've told me about Crystal, she wouldn't want you spending your life in penance." Arthur's eyes filled with tears. "She made me promise to live fully, to experience everything she couldn't. And I've tried, Laurel. Our marriage, our children, my work, I've tried to honor that promise, but I can't escape the fact that I'm living the life she sacrificed hers to give me." I reached across the table and took his hand, the first gesture of connection since my discovery hours earlier. "Then live it better," I said firmly. "If she gave you this life, don't waste it on guilt she never asked you to carry." A tear slipped down Arthur's cheek. "I don't know how to let it go. It's been part of me for so long." "Maybe you don't have to let it go," I suggested. "Maybe you just need to transform it into something else. Something that honors her sacrifice, rather than diminishes it." Arthur looked at me questioningly. "What do you mean?" Before I could answer, the doorbell rang. We both started, suddenly reminded that the world continued outside our intense conversation. Arthur checked his watch and winced. "That's probably Zach," he said. "I called him earlier, when you were out walking. I was not in a good place. He said he'd stop by to check on us." I sighed, not ready for our moment of truth to be interrupted. But Arthur was already rising, moving toward the door with the automatic politeness ingrained over decades of social conditioning. I gathered the photographs scattered across the table, carefully returning them to Crystal's box. As I did, a folded piece of paper slipped from between two photos. I opened it to find a letter written in Crystal's distinctive handwriting, addressed to future Mrs. Harrington. My heart stopped. With trembling hands, I unfolded the letter completely, my eyes scanning the first line. "To the woman my brother will someday love. If you're reading this, Arthur has finally found the courage to share me with you. Before I could read further, I heard footsteps in the hallway. I quickly refolded the letter and slipped it into my pocket just as Arthur returned to the kitchen, our oldest son, Zach, following close behind. Zach looked between us, concern etched on his face. Mom? Dad? What's going on? You guys never cancel anniversary plans. I met Arthur's eyes across the room, silently communicating in the way only couples married for 50 years can do. This was a turning point. How much would we share? How much would we continue to hide? The letter seemed to burn in my pocket, Crystal's voice reaching across time to me, a message I wasn't yet meant to read. Whatever it contained would have to wait until Zach was gone, and Arthur and I could continue the conversation that had only just begun. Your father has something important to tell you, I said, making the decision for both of us. About your Aunt Crystal? Zach's brow furrowed in confusion. Who? Arthur stood frozen, his face a mixture of panic and resignation. For a moment, I thought he might retreat, invent some excuse to avoid sharing the truth with our son. But then, something shifted in his expression, a resolve I hadn't seen before. Sit down, Zach, he said quietly. There's something I should have told you, all of you, a long time ago. Zach glanced at me, confusion evident in his furrowed brow. At 48, our oldest son had Arthur's scholarly demeanor and my practical nature. He was not a man easily flustered, but the tension in the room was palpable. Is everything okay? You're not sick, are you? Zach asked, addressing his father but looking to me for reassurance. I shook my head. It's nothing like that. It's about family history. Something important. Zach sat at the kitchen table, noticing Crystal's box for the first time. What's this? Arthur took his seat again, shoulders squared as if preparing for battle. This belonged to my twin sister, Crystal, your aunt. The shock on Zach's face mirrored what I had felt hours earlier. Your twin sister? Dad, what are you talking about? You don't have a sister. I did, Arthur said softly. She died when we were 23, before I met your mother. I've never spoken about her to you or your siblings. That was a mistake. One of many I've made. For the next 30 minutes, Arthur told our son a condensed version of what he'd shared with me, about Crystal, her life, her illness, her sacrifice. As he spoke, I watched Zach's expression transform from skepticism to shock to a deep, solemn understanding. The grave you visit every month, Zach said when Arthur finished. That's her? Not some old girlfriend like we all thought? Arthur nodded, unable to speak. But why keep her a secret? Zach asked, echoing my own question. Why wouldn't you want us to know about her? Arthur's eyes met mine across the table, seeking help. I remained silent, letting him find his own words. Grief does strange things to people, Arthur finally said. After Crystal died, my parents rarely spoke her name. It was as if by not talking about her, they could pretend it hadn't happened. I adopted their silence without realizing it. Then, as time passed, that silence became comfortable, safe. But we're your family, Zach protested. We had a right to know about her. She was our family too. Arthur flinched at the accusation in our son's tone. You're right. I robbed you of knowing her, even in memory. I robbed your mother of understanding, a fundamental part of who I am. Zach ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so like his father that my heart clenched. I don't know what to say. I feel like I'm meeting a stranger, not the father I've known my whole life. I'm still the same person, Arthur said, a note of desperation entering his voice. Are you? Zach challenged. The father I knew didn't have a secret room behind his bookcase, didn't hide the existence of his twin sister from his wife and children, for 50 years. The harshness in Zach's words hung in the air between them. I found myself in the unexpected position of mediator between my husband and son. Zach, I said gently, this has been a shock for all of us. Your father made choices I don't agree with, but he's trying to make things right now. Zach turned to me, his expression softening slightly. How are you so calm about this, Mom? He let you believe she was an old girlfriend for your entire marriage. I considered the question carefully. Because I'm beginning to understand why he did it, and because I'm learning that Crystal wasn't my rival, she was someone who might have been my friend if circumstances had been different. Arthur looked at me with such naked gratitude that I had to glance away, uncomfortable with his vulnerability. Zach was quiet for a long moment, processing. I need to call Dolly and Leo. They should hear this too. He pulled out his phone, then hesitated. Would you rather tell them yourself, Dad? Arthur nodded. Yes. Together, though. All of us. Can you arrange for everyone to come over this weekend? Your mother and I need to talk more tonight, but by then, we'll be ready to share everything with the whole family. After Zach left, promising to coordinate with his siblings, Arthur and I found ourselves alone again. The emotional weight of the day pressed down on us, neither of us quite sure how to proceed. Thank you, Arthur said finally, for helping with Zach, for not exposing the full extent of your deception. I finished when he trailed off. He winced. Yes, although I deserve whatever you choose to tell them. I reached into my pocket and withdrew Crystal's letter. I found this while you were answering the door. It's addressed to me, or rather, to whoever you would eventually marry. Arthur's eyes widened. I had no idea that existed. I've gone through her things countless times over the years. I never saw it. She must have hidden it well, I said. Maybe she knew you'd try to protect her memory in all the wrong ways. I unfolded the letter again, my heart racing as I prepared to read the words Crystal had written 50 years ago, never knowing who would eventually receive them. Do you want me to leave while you read it? Arthur asked hesitantly. I shook my head. No. I think we need to hear this together. Taking a deep breath, I began to read aloud. To the woman my brother will someday love. If you're reading this, Arthur has finally found the courage to share me with you. Knowing my stubborn brother, this may have taken far longer than it should have. For that, I apologize on his behalf. I'm writing this letter just days after refusing a treatment that might have saved my life. Arthur doesn't understand my choice, and I fear he never will. He believes I sacrificed myself for his future, but the truth is both simpler and more complex. I made the only choice I could live with, for however long I have left. I need you to understand something about my brother. He carries the weight of responsibility like few others. He always has, even as a child. When I first got sick, he put his entire life on hold without hesitation. He slept in hospital chairs for weeks, skipped exams, nearly failed classes he'd been acing. He would have given up everything, his education, his dreams, his future, if I had let him. I couldn't let him. Not because I'm noble or selfless, but because I know my twin better than anyone. Arthur needs purpose. He needs to create, to contribute, to build something lasting. If he had sacrificed his potential for me, only to lose me anyway, that loss would have destroyed him completely. So I made my choice. It may have been the wrong one medically, but it was the right one for us. I get to leave this world knowing he will go on to live a life that matters. That's more valuable to me than a few more months or years of borrowed time. But I know my brother. He will blame himself. He will carry guilt that isn't his to carry. He will punish himself for being the one who survived. This is where you come in. I don't know your name or your face, but I know you must be extraordinary to have won Arthur's heart. He doesn't give his love easily. Please help him understand that my choice was mine alone, made from love, not sacrifice. Help him see that honoring my memory means living fully, not partially. Remind him that I would kick his scholarly behind if I thought he was wasting one moment of his life on misplaced guilt. Know this: if he has given you his heart, It is yours completely. Arthur doesn't know how to love halfway. Whatever space he has kept in his heart for me isn't romantic or comparative. It's simply the place where siblings, especially twins, live forever. Take care of my brother. Remind him to laugh. Challenge him when he retreats into his books and forgets the world. And please, if you have children, tell them about their Aunt Crystal, not as some tragic figure, but as someone who loved photography, practical jokes, and her brother, beyond measure. With gratitude and hope, Crystal P.S. If he hasn't told you I exist until now, feel free to be furious with him. He deserves it. But then forgive him. He deserves that too. My voice broke on the last line. I set the letter down on the table, tears streaming unchecked down my face. I looked up to find Arthur weeping openly, something I'd seen only twice before in our 50 years together, at the births of our first and second children. She knew, he whispered. She knew exactly what I would do. Yes, I agreed softly. She knew you better than anyone. Until you, Arthur said, reaching for my hand across the table. You know me too, Laurel. Even the parts I tried to hide. Didn't pull away from his touch, but I couldn't quite return the gesture either. I'm not sure I do know you, Arthur. Not fully. Not yet. But I think maybe after 50 years it's time I did. The following morning, I woke early, the events of the previous day flooding back before I'd even opened my eyes. Arthur's side of the bed was empty. Not unusual, as he'd always been an early riser. For a moment, I lay still, listening to the familiar sounds of our home. The coffee maker gurgling downstairs, the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, the faint rustling of newspaper pages being turned. 50 years of marriage had created these comfortable rhythms, these predictable patterns, but now I wondered how much of that comfort had been built on unspoken truths and careful omissions. I dressed slowly, mentally preparing for the day ahead. After reading Crystal's letter, Arthur and I had talked late into the night, navigating the complex emotions her words had stirred in both of us. We'd agreed to postpone our anniversary dinner, neither of us in the mood for celebration. Instead, we'd ordered takeout and continued our conversation, sharing memories and questions until exhaustion finally drove us to bed. Downstairs, I found Arthur at the kitchen table, reading glasses perched on his nose, newspaper spread before him. For a moment, I simply watched him. This man who had been my husband for half a century, suddenly a stranger in familiar clothing. Good morning, he said, looking up and offering a tentative smile. I made coffee. I nodded, pouring myself a cup before joining him at the table. I've been thinking, I said, not bothering with small talk. I want to go with you next time. Arthur's brow furrowed in confusion. Go where? To visit Crystal. I met his eyes steadily. I want to meet your sister properly. His expression registered surprise, then uncertainty. It's just a cemetery, Laurel. It's not. It's been your monthly pilgrimage for 50 years, I interrupted. It's important to you, which means it should be important to me. Besides, I added, softening my tone, I'd like to bring her flowers of my own. Arthur set down his newspaper, removing his reading glasses with hands that trembled slightly. I don't know what to say. You don't need to say anything. Just tell me when you're going next and I'll join you. He nodded slowly. Thursday. I usually go Thursday mornings. Thursday it is. I sipped my coffee, gathering courage for what I needed to say next. Arthur, I've made another decision as well. His posture tensed slightly, anticipating something unpleasant. What's that? After we meet with the children this weekend, I want to open up the hidden room, not just to family, but to make it a proper space in our home. Crystal's memories shouldn't be locked away anymore. Arthur's face paled. You want to... What exactly are you suggesting? I'm not suggesting we display everything, I clarified. Some things can remain private, but her photographs, her artwork, those should be part of our home. The grandchildren should grow up seeing her face, knowing who she was. Arthur's fingers tightened around his coffee mug. I've kept those things private for so long, Laurel. They're sacred to me. And they'll remain sacred, I assured him. But sacred doesn't have to mean secret. If Crystal were here, would she want to be hidden away? From everything you've told me, from her own letter, she seems like someone who would want to be remembered openly, joyfully. Arthur was silent for a long moment, struggling visibly with the idea. It's not that simple, he finally said. Those memories, those items, they're intertwined with my guilt, my grief. Seeing them every day might be exactly what you need, I finished for him. Arthur, you've been punishing yourself for 50 years for something that wasn't your fault. Crystal made her choice. She made it out of love for you. By keeping her memory locked away, treated as something shameful or too painful to acknowledge, you're not honoring that love. His eyes flashed with a hint of anger. You don't understand. You can't possibly understand what it's like to lose someone you love? I interrupted, my own anger finally surfacing. No, I can't understand what it's like to lose a twin. But don't you dare suggest I don't understand loss. I lost my father when I was 12. I lost my mother to Alzheimer's, watching her forget me a little more each day for 7 years. And in some ways, Arthur, I've been losing you our entire marriage to a ghost I wasn't allowed to know. He flinched as if I'd struck him. That's not fair, isn't it? I pressed. Every time you retreated into silence about your past, every time you visited that grave without explaining who she really was, every time you wrote in those journals instead of talking to me, you were choosing to keep a part of yourself locked, away, just like that room behind the bookcase. The silence that followed was heavy with half a century of unspoken truths. Arthur pushed back from the table, standing abruptly. I need some air. He moved toward the door, then paused, turning back to me. This isn't easy for me, Laurel. I've lived with this guilt, this grief, this arrangement for so long. I don't know how to be different. I'm not asking you to be different, I said, my voice gentler now. I'm asking you to be complete. With me, with our children, with yourself. He nodded once, a short, jerky movement, then left. The back door closed behind him with a soft click, not the angry slam I might have expected. I remained at the table, emotions churning. For 50 years I had accommodated Arthur's silence, his emotional absence. I had built my life around the spaces he left empty. Now, I was asking him to fill those spaces, to be fully present in our marriage in a way he never had been. It was a lot to ask of a 73-year-old man set in his ways, but it was also, I believed, what Crystal would have wanted for him. The telephone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Dolly, our middle child and only daughter. Mom? Zach called me last night sounding weird. Said something about a family meeting this weekend? What's going on? I took a deep breath, unsure how much to reveal over the phone. Your father, and I have some family history to share with all of you. It's important, but not an emergency. Family history? Dolly's voice sharpened with concern. Mom, are you and Dad okay? You're not getting divorced after 50 years, are you? The question struck me as both absurd and strangely perceptive. Were Arthur and I okay? I honestly didn't know. The revelation about Crystal had shaken the foundation of what I thought our marriage was. But divorce? The thought hadn't even occurred to me. No, honey, nothing like that, I assured her. It's about your father's past before he met me. Something he should have told all of you long ago. Now you're scaring me, Dolly said. Just tell me, is it bad? I considered the question carefully. Was the existence of Crystal, this vibrant, loving woman who had shaped Arthur in ways I was only beginning to understand, a bad thing? No, I said firmly. It's sad in some ways, but it's not bad. It's actually something wonderful that's been hidden for too long. After promising Dolly that all would be explained on Saturday, I hung up and went in search of Arthur. I found him in the backyard, sitting on the old wooden bench beneath the maple tree. He looked up as I approached, his expression guarded, but not hostile. I sat beside him, leaving a small space between us. Dolly called. She's worried. Arthur nodded. I imagine they all will be until they know the truth. And after? I asked. What then? He sighed, looking out across the garden he had tended meticulously for decades. I don't know. They might be angry like Zach. They might feel I've lied to them their whole lives. You have, I said gently. But you can start telling the truth. Now. Arthur turned to me, his eyes searching my face. Will it be enough? After 50 years of silence, can sharing Crystal now make up for hiding her all this time? I reached for his hand, covering it with my own. It's a start. For the children. For us. It's a beginning. His fingers turned, interlacing with mine, a small gesture of connection, of hope. We sat there together as the morning sun filtered through the maple leaves, casting dappled shadows across our joined hands. Thursday, Arthur said finally. We'll visit her together on Thursday. It wasn't a resolution to everything between us. It wasn't a promise that our marriage would emerge unscathed from this seismic shift. But it was a step toward something more honest, more complete than what we had built over the past 50 years. And for now, that was enough. Thursday morning dawned clear and mild. I stood in our bedroom, considering what one wears to meet their husband's long-dead twin sister for the first time. It seemed both trivial and immensely significant. I settled on a simple navy dress I knew Arthur liked, with a light cardigan, against the morning chill. In the kitchen, Arthur was already waiting, a small bouquet of lilacs in his hands, the flowers he had always brought to Crystal's grave. Beside them on the counter sat another bouquet I hadn't seen before, white daisies, with sprigs of lavender. I thought you might want to bring these, Arthur said, gesturing to the daisies. Crystal loved them, said they were honest flowers, no pretense, no fuss. I was touched by the gesture, this small effort to include me in a ritual that had been exclusively his for 50 years. Thank you, I said, picking up the bouquet. They're perfect. We drove in silence to Cedar Grove Cemetery, about 30 minutes from our home. I had known its location all these years, but had never accompanied Arthur, always finding some excuse when he occasionally invited me. Now I wondered how different our marriage might have been if I had joined him even once, if I had stood beside him at Crystal's grave and asked about his sister, instead of assuming she was a lost love. The cemetery was peaceful, well-maintained, with ancient oaks providing dappled shade across the gently rolling grounds. Arthur navigated the winding paths with the ease of long familiarity, eventually stopping near a simple granite headstone set beneath a flowering dogwood tree. Crystal Ann Harrington, 1949, 1972. The light that burns twice as bright burns half as long. I stood beside Arthur, studying the inscription. The quote seemed fitting for the vibrant young woman I was coming to know through her journals, photos, and brother's memories. Arthur knelt, carefully removing the previous month's withered lilacs from the small metal vase embedded in the ground. He replaced them with the fresh blooms, arranging them with practiced care. "Hello, Chris," he said softly, his voice simultaneously stronger and more vulnerable than I was used to hearing. "I've brought someone special today. This is Laurel, my wife." He glanced up at me, a silent invitation to join him. I knelt beside him, placing my daisies and lavender next to his lilacs. "Hello, Crystal," I said, feeling self-conscious but determined. "I'm sorry it's taken me 50 years to properly meet you. Arthur's hand found mine, squeezing gently in gratitude or reassurance. Perhaps both. I used to tell her everything, Arthur said, his eyes fixed on the headstone. All the milestones, when we got engaged, married, when each of the children was born. I'd come here and talk to her for hours sometimes. What about the everyday things? I asked. Did you share those too? A small sad smile touched his lips. Not as much. It felt selfish somehow, to talk about ordinary happiness when she'd lost the chance for any happiness at all. The admission hung in the air between us, revealing yet another layer of Arthur's self-imposed penance. I think she would have wanted to hear about the ordinary days too, I said gently. From her letter, she sounds like someone who valued the whole of life, not just the highlights. Arthur nodded slowly. You're right. She would tease me sometimes about being too serious, too focused on the big moments. The magic is in the mundane, Artie, she'd say. Artie? I raised an eyebrow, smiling despite the solemnity of the moment. She called you Artie? Only she could get away with it, Arthur said, a genuine chuckle escaping him. She had nicknames for everyone she loved. I wish I'd known her, I said, and meant it. So do I. Arthur's voice cracked slightly. She would have been the cool aunt to our kids, the one who showed up with inappropriate gifts and took them on adventures we'd pretend to disapprove of. For a moment, we both sat in silence, contemplating the alternate universe where Cristal had lived, where she had been part of our family's story from the beginning. I need to tell you something, Arthur said finally, his voice low and hesitant. Something I've never told anyone. I waited, giving him space to find the words. The day Cristal died, I wasn't there. His hands clenched into fists in his lap. I was at a department meeting discussing my thesis project. The hospital called, said she'd taken a turn for the worse, but the meeting was important for my academic future. I told them I'd be there in an hour. He drew a shuddering breath. She was gone when I arrived. I missed her final moments because I was talking about modernist literature in a stuffy conference room. The raw anguish in his voice made my heart ache. Oh, Arthur. All these years, that's been the real source of my guilt, he continued. Not just that she refused treatment to protect my future, but that when it really mattered, I chose that. Future over being with her. Did you know she was that close to the end? I asked gently. He shook his head. No. The doctors had said days, maybe a week. I thought I had time. Then you made the best decision you could with the information you had, I said. And I suspect Cristal would have wanted it that way. From everything you've told me, from her own letter, she wanted you to pursue your education, your career. But to not be there, at the very end. His voice broke completely. I moved closer, wrapping my arm around his shoulders as he wept openly, perhaps for the first time, at his sister's grave. 50 years of carefully contained grief poured out of him, soaking the ground where Cristal rested. When his tears finally subsided, Arthur looked exhausted but somehow lighter, as if a crushing weight had begun to lift. I've never told anyone that, he said again, wiping his face with a handkerchief. Not even in my journals. Thank you for telling me, I said, for trusting me with it. He nodded, then slowly rose to his feet, helping me up beside him. I'd like to show you something else today, if you're willing. Of course. We returned to the car, driving not toward home, but in an unfamiliar direction. 20 minutes later, Arthur pulled up before a modest brick building with a sign reading, Cristal, Harrington Memorial Photography Scholarship Fund. I turned to him in confusion. What is this? This is where I've been donating a portion of my salary for the past 45 years, Arthur said quietly. It provides scholarships to promising photography students who couldn't otherwise afford education. Students like Cristal. I stared at the building, then back at my husband. You started this? He nodded. After our first child was born. I realized I needed to do something positive with my grief, something that would have made her proud. He paused. I should have told you about it, about all of it. Yes, you should have, I agreed, but without anger. Can we go inside? The interior was simple but elegant. A small gallery space displaying photographs taken by scholarship recipients over the years. On the wall near the entrance hung a large black and white portrait of Crystal, camera in hand, her smile radiant and challenging. This was her last self-portrait, Arthur explained, standing before the photograph. Taken about a month before she died, I studied the image, seeing the resemblance to Arthur more clearly now. The same determined set of the jaw, the same intelligent eyes. But where Arthur's expression had always held a certain reserve, Crystal's emanated fearless joy. The fund supports about 5 students each year, Arthur continued. Many have gone on to significant careers in photojournalism, documentary work, fine art photography, all the paths Crystal might have taken. A middle-aged woman approached us, smiling warmly at Arthur. Professor Harrington, we weren't expecting you today. Hello, Blanche, Arthur greeted her. I'd like you to meet my wife, Laurel. Blanche's eyebrows rose slightly in surprise as she turned to me. Mrs. Harrington, it's a pleasure to finally meet you. I've been the administrator here for 15 years, and I've heard so much about you. I shook her hand, managing to hide my own surprise. This woman knew me through Arthur's stories, while I hadn't known this place, or this aspect of my husband, existed at all. Blanche was actually one of our first scholarship recipients, Arthur explained. She studied photojournalism at Columbia before coming back to help run the fund. The professor changed my life, Blanche said simply, just as Crystal's story has changed the lives of everyone who's come through our program. As Blanche led us through the gallery, pointing out particularly notable works and sharing stories of various scholarship recipients, I watched Arthur. In this space, surrounded by his sister's legacy, he moved differently, with more confidence, less of the careful restraint I was accustomed to seeing in him. Here was yet another Arthur I had never fully known, not just the grieving brother, or the guilty survivor, but the man who had channeled that grief into creating something meaningful, something that extended Crystal's influence far beyond her brief life. When we finally returned to the car, I turned to him before he could start. The engine. Why didn't you tell me about this place? All these years, this amazing thing you created, why keep it separate from our life together? Arthur's hands rested on the steering wheel, his gaze fixed forward. At first, it was just a small donation fund. By the time it grew into this, the pattern was set. My life with you and the children was one thing. My connection to Crystal was another. I never deliberately decided to keep them separate. It just happened that way. And now, I asked, now that I know about Crystal, about this place? He turned to me, his expression both uncertain and hopeful. Now, I don't know. I've lived divided for so long, I'm not sure I know how to be whole. I reached across the console, taking his hand. We'll figure it out together. As we drove home, something fundamental had shifted between us. The visit to Crystal's grave, Arthur's confession about his absence at her death, the discovery of the scholarship fund. Each revelation had moved us past the point where we could return to our old patterns, our comfortable half-truths. What lay ahead was unknown, but for the first time in 50 years, we were facing it with a shared understanding of the past that had shaped us both. By Saturday morning, I had moved through a spectrum of emotions: shock, anger, hurt, understanding, and finally, a tentative acceptance. Our children were due to arrive at noon for the family meeting, and I felt both apprehension and a strange sense of liberation at the prospect of finally bringing this hidden part of our history into the open. Arthur had spent the previous evening preparing the hidden room, removing some of the more personal journals, but arranging Crystal's photographs and artwork in a way that told the story of her life. I'd given him privacy for this task, understanding his need to curate what would be shared with our children. When I entered his study that morning, the bookcase had been pulled away from the wall, the hidden door standing open. Arthur sat at his desk, sorting through a collection of photographs. "Are you ready for this?" I asked, setting a cup of coffee beside him. He looked up, fatigue evident in the shadows beneath his eyes. "As ready as I'll ever be. I didn't sleep much." I know. I'd felt him tossing and turning beside me throughout the night. "It's going to be all right, Arthur. They might be shocked, confused, even angry at first. But they'll understand, eventually." He nodded, though doubt lingered in his expression. 50 years is a long time to keep a secret. "Yes," I agreed simply. There was no use denying the magnitude of what he'd done. Arthur picked up one of the photographs, a young Crystal sitting, cross-legged on a dock, grinning at the camera. "I've been thinking about what you said at the cemetery, about how I should have shared the everyday moments with her too, not just the milestones. And you were right. I've spent 50 years treating her memory like a shrine, something solemn and sacred." He touched the photograph gently. But Crystal was anything but solemn. She was laughing more often than not. By keeping her memories so formal, I've done her a disservice. I sat in the chair opposite his desk. "It's not too late to change that." "No," he agreed. "It's not." The doorbell rang at precisely noon. Zach always was punctual to a fault. By 12:15, all 3 of our children had arrived. Zach, looking serious and preoccupied. Dolly, visibly anxious, her questions barely contained. And Leo, our youngest, cheerfully oblivious to the tension, having been told only that there was a family gathering. Arthur gathered them in the living room, where I'd set out coffee and the cinnamon rolls that had been a Sunday tradition when the children were young. The familiar scent seemed to ease some of the tension, a sensory reminder of family and security. "Thank you all for coming," Arthur began, his professor's voice steadier than I'd expected. "Your mother and I have something important to share with you, something I should have told you long ago." Dolly, never one for patience, interrupted immediately. "Dad, just tell us. Are you sick? Is Mom sick? What's going on?" "No one is sick," I assured her, reaching over to squeeze her hand. "This is about family history." Zach, who already knew part of the story, sat stone-faced, waiting for his siblings' reactions. Arthur took a deep breath. "I had a twin sister named Crystal. She died when we were 23 before I met your mother. For reasons that seemed necessary at the time, I kept her existence private. None of you knew you had an aunt. That was wrong of me, and I'm sorry." The silence that followed was profound. Leo was the first to break it. "A twin sister? Dad, how do you keep something like that secret for our entire lives?" "Practice," Arthur said, with unexpected bitterness. "And the help of grandparents who preferred to pretend she never existed rather than face their grief." Dolly turned to me, tears welling in her eyes. "Did you know, Mom?" "Not until a few days ago," I said gently. "I discovered it by accident." "The grave," Leo said suddenly, comprehension dawning on his face. "The one you visit every month. That's her, isn't it? Not some old girlfriend like we all thought." Arthur nodded. "Yes, that's Crystal's grave." "Why?" Dolly asked, her voice breaking. "Why would you hide something so important? She was our family, Dad. We had a right to know her, even if only through your memories." Arthur's shoulders slumped slightly. "You're right. You did have that right, and I denied it to you. The full explanation is complicated, but the simplest version is this. I blamed myself for her death, and speaking about her meant confronting that guilt." "But that doesn't make sense," Leo protested. "How could her death be your fault? Were you driving? Was it an accident?" "No," Arthur said. "She had leukemia. She refused a treatment that might have saved her because she didn't want to interrupt. My education. Understanding dawned on their faces. The weight of this knowledge, the impact it must have had on their father. "There's more," I said. "Your father would like to show you something." Arthur stood, gesturing for them to follow. He led the way to his study, where the hidden door stood open. Our children crowded in the doorway, expressions varying from shock to disbelief to fascination. "This is where I've kept Crystal's memory alive," Arthur explained, stepping back to allow them entry. "Her photographs, her journals, her artwork." They moved into the small room cautiously, as if entering a sacred space. In a way, it was. A sanctuary Arthur had created to honor his sister, hidden from the world but central to his inner life. Dolly was the first to pick up one of the photographs, Crystal and Arthur on their graduation day, arms slung around each, other's shoulders. "She looked like you, Dad, around the eyes." "Yes," Arthur said softly. "People often couldn't tell us apart from behind when we were children." Leo examined the photographs of Crystal with her camera. She was a photographer? She wanted to be. She was studying journalism before she got sick. She had remarkable talent. Arthur's voice filled with pride. "That's why I established the scholarship fund in her name." This revelation brought another round of shocked expressions. "The Crystal Harrington Memorial Fund?" Zach asked. "That's real? I thought it was just something mentioned in your department newsletter." Arthur nodded. "It's very real. It provides scholarships for photography students who couldn't otherwise afford education. Your mother and I visited it yesterday." Zach's expression softened slightly. That's actually incredible, Dad." For the next hour, our children explored the hidden room, examining photographs, asking questions about the aunt they'd never known. Arthur answered each question with growing ease, the stiffness gradually leaving his posture as he shared stories about Crystal. Not just the solemn, sacred aspects of her memory that he'd guarded so carefully, but funny anecdotes, mischievous, escapades, ordinary moments between twins who had shared everything until death separated them. I stood in the doorway, watching my family discover this missing piece of their history. There was hurt in their questions, confusion in their expressions, but there was also growing understanding and, remarkably, joy in the discovery of this vibrant woman who shared their blood. At one point, Dolly emerged from the room, tears streaming down her face. She came to stand beside me. "I don't know whether to be angry with Dad or heartbroken for him," she whispered. "Both are valid," I told her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "I've felt both myself these past few days." "How do you forgive something like this, Mom?" 50. Years of protecting himself the only way he knew how, I finished for her. "I'm still figuring that out, honey. But I do know that your father has punished himself far more severely than any of us could." Dolly leaned her head against my shoulder, a gesture reminiscent of her childhood. "I wish I could have known her." "So do I said, meaning it completely. "But we can know her now, through your father's memories, and maybe that's a start." Later, as our children prepared to leave, each taking a photograph of Crystal that Arthur had selected for them, there was a palpable shift in the atmosphere. The secret that had cast such a long shadow over our family had been brought into the light, and though its revelation had caused pain, there was also relief in the truth finally being spoken. "We'll come back tomorrow," Zach said, embracing his father with a warmth that had been absent during his first visit. "I want to hear more about her." Arthur nodded, too overcome to speak. As we stood on the porch waving goodbye, I felt Arthur's hand slip into mine. It was a small gesture, but in it I felt the first tentative steps toward a new kind of freedom. For him, for me, for our family. The sunlight caught the silver in his hair, and for a moment, I could almost see the shadow of a young woman standing, Beside him, her smile as bright and challenging as in her photographs. Not a rival, not a ghost, but family. Finally acknowledged, finally embraced, finally allowed to be part of our story. In the days that followed, our home transformed. After 50 years of silence, Crystal's presence filled our house, her photographs appearing on walls that had previously held only formal family portraits, her artwork displayed in the living room, her story shared openly when friends or neighbors inquired about these new additions. Arthur had been hesitant at first, uncomfortable with this public acknowledgement of what had been private for so long. But with each passing day, I noticed a subtle change in him. The burden he had carried for 5 decades was lightening, not because he had forgotten his guilt or grief, but because he was finally allowing others to help him carry it. Our children visited frequently, each processing the revelation in their own way. Zach, our analytical firstborn, had gone into research mode, studying leukemia treatments from the 1970s and the medical ethics of bone marrow transplantation. I suspected he was trying to understand, intellectually, the choice Crystal had made. Leo, our youngest, had become fascinated with photography, borrowing some of Crystal's old cameras from Arthur's collection and experimenting with them. "I want to see the world the way she did," he explained when I found him in the backyard, photographing a spider's web glistening with morning dew. Dolly's approach had been the most direct. "Tell me everything about her," she had demanded of Arthur during her latest visit. Not just the big moments, the little things. What did she like for breakfast? What was her favorite color? Did she bite her nails like Leo does? Arthur had been surprised by this request, but had risen to the challenge, sharing the everyday details of his life with Crystal. I watched from the doorway as they sat together in his study, Dolly taking notes as if interviewing a primary source for one of her journalism projects, Arthur becoming more animated with each memory he shared. "She always put salt on her watermelon," he told Dolly, chuckling at the memory. I thought it was disgusting, but she swore it enhanced the sweetness. "That's exactly what Leo does," Dolly exclaimed. "Remember how grossed out we were when he started doing that as a kid?" Arthur's expression shifted to one of wonder. I never made the connection. There were no genetic links, of course, but still. It's remarkable. "What else?" Dolly pressed. "Did she have any weird habits? Superstitions?" For 2 hours they had talked, Arthur recalling details about Crystal that he perhaps hadn't consciously remembered in decades. When Dolly finally left, Arthur seemed both exhausted and exhilarated, as if he had run a marathon, but finished strong. "Thank you," he said to me that evening, as we prepared for bed. "For what?" "For pushing me to share Crystal with the children. It's been healing in a way I didn't expect." I smiled, recognizing the understatement. "They needed to know her. You needed to share her." He nodded, thoughtful. "I've spent 50 years trying not to think about certain memories, the painful ones, the ones tied to my guilt. But in doing so, I lost touch with so many good memories too. Talking with Dolly today, it was like rediscovering parts of Crystal I had forgotten." 1 week after our initial discovery of the hidden room, I decided it was time for my own exploration of Crystal. While Arthur was meeting with the board of the scholarship fund, I carefully packed a picnic lunch and drove to Cedar Grove Cemetery. The day was perfect for a picnic, warm but not hot, with a gentle breeze rustling the leaves of the dogwood tree that shaded Crystal's grave. I spread a small blanket on the grass beside her headstone and unpacked my basket. A chicken salad sandwich. Arthur had mentioned it was her favorite. A small container of watermelon chunks, with a tiny salt shaker in her honor. And a thermos of lemonade. "I hope you don't mind the company," I said aloud, feeling only slightly self-conscious about speaking to a headstone. I thought it was time we had a proper chat. Just the two of us. I settled myself comfortably on the blanket and began to eat, occasionally offering comments about the weather, the blooming flowers nearby, the family news. It felt strangely natural, as if I were having lunch with a friend rather than a one-sided, Conversation at a gravesite. I want to thank you, I said finally, addressing the heart of why I had come. For your letter. For loving your brother enough to make sure he found happiness after you were gone. For seeing something in me that you trusted, even without knowing me. The breeze picked up slightly, ruffling the edges of my blanket. I chose to take it as a response. I need your help, I continued. Arthur is trying. He's sharing memories, allowing your presence back into his life, our life, in ways I never expected. But I can see him struggling with the guilt. It's been his companion for so long, I'm not sure he knows who he is without it. I poured a small cup of lemonade, setting it beside the flowers at the base of her headstone, an offering of sorts. I don't know how to help him let go of that guilt. I'm not sure I have the right to even ask him to. His relationship with grief is his own, and I need to respect that. But I also need him to be fully present in our marriage, in whatever time we have left together. I fell silent, watching a butterfly land briefly on the granite marker before fluttering away. There were no dramatic revelations, no sudden insights, just the quiet certainty that I was exactly where I needed to be, doing exactly what needed to be done. When I returned home, I found Arthur in the kitchen, attempting to prepare dinner, a task that had always been my domain throughout our marriage. "You're cooking?" I asked, unable to hide my surprise. He turned from the stove, a dish towel slung over his shoulder. "Trying to. I may have been a bit ambitious." He gestured ruefully at the chaos of pots and ingredients scattered across the countertops. "I wanted to surprise you." "I'm definitely surprised," I said, smiling as I set my picnic basket on a free corner of the counter. "What's the occasion?" "No occasion. Just—" He hesitated, searching for words. A small step toward change. Being more present, more equal in our partnership. The simple statement touched me deeply. "Thank you. Need some help?" "Desperately," he admitted with a self-deprecating laugh. We worked side by side, salvaging his attempted chicken marsala, talking easily about our respective days. When I mentioned my picnic with Crystal, Arthur paused in his stirring, emotion flickering across his face. "You visited her on your own?" I nodded. It felt important, to establish my own relationship with her in a way. I hope that doesn't seem strange. "Not strange," he said softly. "Just unexpected. What did you talk about?" "This and that. Family news, the weather." I kept my tone light, not wanting to burden him with my deeper thoughts about his guilt. Mostly, I just wanted to thank her. For what? For raising such a good brother. For making sure he found happiness after she was gone. I met his eyes across the kitchen island. For giving me 50 years with a man who, despite his flaws and secrets, has been a loving husband and father. Arthur's eyes glistened. I haven't always been. Loving, I mean. Not completely, not honestly. "No," I agreed. "But you're trying now. We both are." Later that evening, as we sat in the living room with coffee, Arthur retrieved a worn leather journal from his desk drawer, one I hadn't seen before. "I'd like to share something with you," he said, settling beside me on the sofa. "I've been keeping this journal since shortly after we were married. It's different from the others." He handed it to me, and I opened it with careful hands. Inside, I found not the chronicle of grief and guilt I had expected, but a record of joy. Our first Christmas together, the birth of each of our children, family vacations, professional accomplishments, quiet moments of contentment in our shared life. Every time something happened that I wished Crystal could have experienced too. "I wrote it here," Arthur explained. "It started as another form of guilt, documenting the happiness I was having that she never would. But over time, it became something else. A way of including her in our life, I suppose." I turned the pages slowly, seeing our marriage through Arthur's eyes, the sweet, ordinary moments he had treasured enough to record, the milestones he had marked with both joy and a brother's regret that his twin couldn't share them. "It's beautiful," I said finally, closing the journal with reverence. "Thank you for sharing it with me." Arthur covered my hand with his. "I've been thinking about what you said, about transforming my guilt into something else. I'm not sure how to do that completely, but I think this might be a start. Recognizing that my grief and my joy have coexisted all along." In that moment, I saw a glimpse of what our future might hold. Not the complete absence of Arthur's guilt or grief, but a new relationship with those emotions. Not a marriage suddenly perfect after 50 years of misunderstanding, but one more honest, more conscious, more deeply connected through shared knowledge of the past. It wasn't everything, but it was a beginning, a discovery of new possibilities. Within a relationship I had thought I understood completely. The ripples of our family revelation spread outward, touching people beyond our immediate circle. 3 weeks after Arthur had shared the truth with our children, we decided to host a small gathering, a belated celebration of our 50th anniversary, but also an opportunity to properly introduce Crystal to our extended family and close friends. Arthur had been surprisingly enthusiastic about the idea, helping with invitations and suggesting we display some of Crystal's photography in the living room. I saw this as another positive step in his journey toward integrating his sister's memory into our shared life. "Should we invite Christine?" I asked as we finalized the guest list. Christine was Arthur's younger sister, 8 years his junior, born after Crystal's death. Their relationship had always been cordial but distant, partly due to the age gap, and partly, I now realized, because of Arthur's complicated feelings about having another sister. Arthur hesitated. "I don't know if she'll come. We haven't spoken much since Mother's funeral. But she should know about Crystal. She's her sister too. Half-sister, technically," Arthur corrected. "Same father, different mothers. My father remarried surprisingly quickly after Crystal died." This was news to me. "You never told me that." Arthur shrugged, a defensive gesture I recognized from our earlier conversations about his family. "It wasn't something we discussed. My father met Christine's mother at a grief support group. They married 6 months after Crystal died. I was not supportive." I could imagine how the young Arthur, raw with grief and guilt over his twin's death, would have perceived his father's rapid remarriage. "All the more reason to include Christine now. This is part of her family history, too." Arthur nodded reluctantly, and we added her name to the list. The day of the gathering arrived, our home transformed with flowers, photographs, and selected pieces of Crystal's artwork. Our children came early to help with preparations, each bringing a dish or drinks, all visibly excited about this public acknowledgement of their newly discovered aunt. The first resistance came from an unexpected source. Arthur's college friend and former colleague, Rex, arrived early with his wife. As Arthur proudly showed them Crystal's photographs now displayed on our living room wall, Rex's expression grew increasingly troubled. "Arthur, old friend," he said, finally, pulling him aside while I pretended not to listen from the dining room. "Are you sure about all this? It seems rather morbid, dwelling on the past this way." Arthur stiffened. "It's not morbid to acknowledge my sister's existence. If anything, keeping her hidden all these years was the unhealthy choice." Rex glanced around, lowering his voice. "But after 50 years? It's rather dramatic, isn't it? And what about Laurel? How does she feel about having your dead sister suddenly become the center of attention?" "It was Laurel who encouraged me to bring Crystal back into our family's life," Arthur replied, his tone cooler than I'd heard in years. "She understands what I'm only beginning to. That honoring Crystal's memory means being open about her life, not hiding it away like something shameful." Rex raised his hands in a placating gesture. I meant no offense. I'm just concerned about you, that's all. You've always been so private about your past. This seems like such a radical change. It is, Arthur agreed. And it's long overdue. As more guests arrived, I noticed similar reactions, though most were more tactful than Rex. Old friends exchanged puzzled glances when Arthur enthusiastically shared stories about Crystal. Neighbors who had known us for decades looked confused by this sudden revelation of a sister they'd never heard mentioned. Through it all, Arthur remained steadfast, his initial nervousness giving way to a quiet confidence I found both surprising and moving. Each time he spoke, Crystal's name, each story he shared, seemed to strengthen him rather than cause pain, as I had feared. The most significant moment came when Christine arrived. She was a petite woman in her 60s, with intelligent eyes reminiscent of Arthur's but little other physical resemblance. They had the awkward, overly polite relationship of acquaintances rather than siblings, exchanging holiday cards and occasional phone calls, but rarely spending time together. "Christine," Arthur greeted her, embracing her stiffly. "Thank you for coming." "Your invitation was intriguing," she replied. "A celebration and a revelation," it said. "Very mysterious." Arthur led her to the display of Crystal's photographs. "This is who I wanted you to know about. Crystal, my twin sister, your half-sister." Christine stared at the photographs, her expression unreadable. "I don't understand. Why haven't I heard about her before?" "It's complicated," Arthur began, then stopped himself. "No, actually it's simple. After Crystal died, our parents, your father, chose not to speak of her. I followed their example, keeping her memory private. That was a mistake I'm trying to correct now." Christine studied the photographs intently, particularly one showing Arthur and Crystal as teenagers, sitting on a porch swing. "You were twins? Why didn't Father ever tell me?" "I don't know," Arthur admitted. "Perhaps it was too painful for him. Perhaps he thought it would be easier for you not to know about the daughter he lost." "Easier for me, or easier for him?" Christine's voice held a bitter edge. "Do you have any idea what it was like growing up with a father who was always distant, always sad for reasons no one would explain? A mother who felt she was competing with a ghost? A brother who could barely stand to be in the same room with me?" Arthur flinched at her words. "I never meant to make you feel unwelcome, Christine. I was young, grieving. I didn't handle Father's remarriage well. And now, 50 years later, you decide I should know about the sister I never met?" Christine shook her head. "What am I supposed to do with this information, Arthur? How does this revelation help anyone?" Before Arthur could respond, Dolly approached, placing a gentle hand on Christine's arm. "Aunt Christine? I'm sorry, this must be overwhelming. But speaking as someone who just found out about Aunt Crystal myself, it does help. It explains so much about our family, about Dad. It fills in missing pieces of who we are." Christine softened slightly at Dolly's intervention. "I suppose it does explain some things." She turned back to Arthur. "I always wondered why you visited that cemetery every month. Mother thought it was an old girlfriend. Father never corrected her." "I'm sorry you weren't told the truth," Arthur said quietly. "That was wrong of all of us." "Yes, it was." Christine's tone was firm but not unkind. "I need some time to process this. 50 years of family history just changed for me." As she moved away to get a drink, I approached Arthur. "Are you okay?" He nodded slowly. "I expected worse, honestly. She has every right to be angry." "She'll come around," I said, hoping it was true. "She just needs time." The gathering continued, a strange mix of celebration and revelation. Our closest friends adjusted quickly, asking thoughtful questions about Crystal and admiring her artwork. Others remained visibly uncomfortable with the subject, changing the topic whenever Crystal was mentioned. By early evening, most guests, had departed, leaving only our children, their spouses, and Christine, who had remained quietly observing throughout the event. As we sat in the living room with coffee and dessert, Christine finally spoke again. "I have some old photo albums of Father's," she said, addressing Arthur. "He never showed them to me, kept them locked in his office. After he died, I found them but never looked through them properly. I wonder now if they might contain pictures of Cristal." Arthur's eyes widened. "I'd assumed he got rid of everything after she died. Mother burned most of our childhood photos that included Cristal." "He must have hidden some away," Christine said. "I'll bring them next time I visit, if you'd like to look through them together." It was a small olive branch, but Arthur received it with visible emotion. "I'd like that very much." As the evening wound down, I found myself on the porch with Christine, both of us enjoying a moment of quiet after the social exertion of the day. "Thank you," she said unexpectedly. "For what?" "For pushing Arthur to share this, for including me." She gazed out at the darkening garden. "I've spent my whole life feeling like an outsider in my own family, never understanding why. Today was difficult, but it was also clarifying." "It's been the same for all of us," I admitted. "Even after 50 years of marriage, I realized there were parts of Arthur I never truly knew." Christine nodded thoughtfully. "Do you think people can really change at our age? Can Arthur become the brother he never was to me? Can you and he have a more honest marriage after 5 decades of secrets?" It was the question I had been asking myself for weeks. "I don't know, but I believe it's worth trying." As we rejoined the others inside, I watched Arthur with new eyes, the way he laughed more freely than before, the careful attention he paid to Christine's comments, the open affection he showed our children. There was resistance still, from friends who didn't understand, from family members processing complex emotions, perhaps even from parts of ourselves not yet ready to fully embrace change. But in that moment, seeing Arthur surrounded by family, Crystal's photographs looking down on us all, I felt a quiet certainty that we were on the right path, however winding, however steep, towards something truer than what had come before. 1 month after discovering Crystal's existence, I found myself standing in our bedroom, contemplating the 2 items laid out on the bed, an elegant charcoal gray dress and a camera, one of Crystal's, a vintage Nikon that Arthur had carefully maintained over the decades. Today marked the 50th anniversary of Crystal's death. Arthur had always observed this date alone, retreating into private grief and emerging subdued but composed. This year would be different. For the first time, he had asked if I would accompany him not just to the cemetery but to a special event at the Scholarship Foundation. "Are you ready?" Arthur appeared in the doorway, already dressed in his best suit. His eyes fell on the camera. "You're bringing that?" "If it's appropriate," I said, suddenly uncertain. I don't know, it felt right somehow. To honor her passion. Arthur crossed the room, picking up the camera with reverent hands. "She would have liked that." He handed it to me, something like pride shining in his eyes. "Do you know how to use it?" "Dolly showed me the basics yesterday. I won't pretend to be skilled, but I can manage to capture a few images." He nodded, then noticed my hesitation between the dress and a more casual outfit I'd laid aside. "The dress," he suggested gently. Crystal always said important days deserve proper acknowledgement. She would dress up even for difficult anniversaries. As we drove to the cemetery, I sensed Arthur's tension in the tight grip of his hands on the steering wheel. This day had always been his alone, a private ritual of grief observed in solitude. Sharing it represented yet another boundary crossing in our evolving relationship. The cemetery was peaceful in the morning light. We weren't the only visitors to Crystal's grave. To my surprise, Zach, Dolly, and Leo were already there, each holding small bouquets of flowers. Arthur stopped short at the sight of them. "You came," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Of course we did." Dolly replied. She's our aunt. Those simple words, acknowledging the family connection that had been hidden for so long, brought tears to Arthur's eyes. Together, the five of us stood at Crystal's grave, each placing our flowers, each taking a moment for private reflection. I lifted Crystal's camera, capturing the image of my family gathered around the headstone, 3 generations connected by blood and memory, to a woman only one of us had known in life. The moment felt sacred, a bridge between past and present. After the cemetery, we drove to the Crystal Harrington Memorial Photography Scholarship Fund building. Today was the annual exhibition of work by current and former scholarship recipients, usually attended only by Arthur and the foundation staff. This year, our entire family would be present. Blanche greeted us warmly at the entrance, her eyes widening at the sight of our family group. Professor Harrington, we weren't expecting such a delegation. A lot has changed in the past month, Arthur explained, introducing each family member. My wife and children wanted to see the exhibition this year. How wonderful, Blanche said, though I detected a flicker of concern in her expression. There's been a small change to the program today. I hope you don't mind. Before she could elaborate, another voice called out from across the lobby. Arthur, there you are. We turned to see an elegant woman in her 70s approaching, supported by a younger man who resembled her strongly around the eyes. Despite her obvious physical frailty, she moved with determination. Margaret, Arthur greeted her with evident surprise. I didn't expect to see you here. That was rather the point, she replied with a brittle smile. Blanche thought it would be a nice surprise. 50 years is a significant milestone after all. Arthur turned to me, a hint of discomfort in his expression. Laurel, this is Margaret Sullivan. She was Crystal's roommate during her first hospital stay. Margaret, my wife, Laurel. Margaret's shrewd eyes assessed me openly. So, you're Laurel. After all these years, I finally get to meet you. Her tone was polite, but held a challenge I couldn't quite interpret. It's a pleasure to meet you, I said, extending my hand. Arthur has told me about Crystal's friends from the hospital. Has he? Margaret raised an eyebrow. That's new. For decades, he's kept his 2 lives quite separate. Before I could respond, to this pointed comment, Blanche intervened smoothly. Let's move into the gallery. The exhibition is about to begin. The gallery space had been transformed with photographs from 50 scholarship recipients, one from each year since the Foundation's inception. The diversity of styles, subjects, and approaches created a visual journey through 5 decades of photographic art, all made possible by Crystal's legacy. As we moved through the exhibition, I noticed Margaret watching Arthur closely. Her expression, a complex mixture of affection and something harder to define. Resentment, perhaps. Curiosity piqued. I made my way to her side as Arthur was engaged in conversation with one of the younger photographers. You've known Arthur a long time. I said, keeping my tone conversational. Margaret nodded. Since before you, dear. I was there when Crystal died. I witnessed what it did to him. It must have been devastating. It was. Margaret turned to face me directly. He was never the same afterward. None of us who loved Crystal were. Which is why I find this sudden family integration somewhat jarring. I met her gaze steadily. It was long overdue, perhaps. Or perhaps there was wisdom in Arthur's choice to keep his grief private, to honor Crystal in his own way without turning her into a family anecdote. The criticism stung, but I recognized the protectiveness behind it. You care about preserving her memory authentically. I care about Arthur, Margaret corrected. For 50 years, he's maintained this foundation, visited her grave, kept her spirit alive in meaningful ways, all while building a life with you, a life she wanted him to have. She glanced toward where Arthur stood with our children. I worry that this new openness risks simplifying what was a profound, complex grief. turning it into a heartwarming story of family reconciliation. I considered her words carefully. That's not our intention. If anything, understanding Crystal's place in Arthur's life has complicated things, not simplified them. But it's allowed him to be more honest, with us and with himself. Margaret seemed unconvinced. Just be careful. Arthur has balanced these worlds for decades. Disturbing that balance could have consequences you haven't considered. Before I could ask what she meant, Blanche called everyone to attention for the formal presentation. A young woman, this year's scholarship recipient, unveiled a special exhibition, a series of photographs recreating some of Crystal's unfinished projects based on notes found in her journals. As the presentation continued, I found myself watching Margaret rather than the photographs. She was crying silently, elegant and composed even in her grief. Whatever her relationship had been with Crystal and subsequently with Arthur, it clearly remained profound 50 years later. When the formal program ended, Arthur approached Margaret, speaking to her quietly. I couldn't hear their conversation, but I saw her reach up to touch his face in a gesture of intimate familiarity that made me suddenly, irrationally jealous. Who was this woman who shared a history with my husband that I had only recently learned existed? Later, as we prepared to leave, Margaret sought me out again. I may have been too harsh earlier, she said without preamble. Seeing you and your children here today, it would have made Crystal happy. She always worried Arthur would isolate himself in his grief. Which he did, in many ways, I said. Margaret nodded thoughtfully. Yes and no. He created this place, kept her memory alive through helping others. That's not isolation, it's transformation of grief into purpose. She paused. Just promise me one thing. What's that? Don't try to fix him. Don't try to make his grief more palatable, more socially acceptable. Some wounds aren't meant to heal completely. They become part of who we are. Her words stayed with me as we drove home, our children following in their own cars. Arthur was unusually quiet, lost in thought. Margaret seems very protective of you, I observed finally. He glanced at me, then back at the road. She's protective of Crystal's memory. And yes, of me by extension. We share a bond forged in one of the darkest periods of my life. Were you and she ever? No, Arthur said firmly. Nothing like that. Margaret loved Crystal. They became extraordinarily close during those months in the hospital. After Crystal died, Margaret helped me establish the foundation. She's been on the board ever since. I nodded, ashamed of my momentary jealousy. She thinks I'm trying to change you, to simplify your grief into something more comfortable for the family. Arthur was silent for a long moment. Are you? The question caught me off guard. No. I'm trying to understand you. All of you. Including the parts you've kept hidden. That's not the same as trying to change you, isn't it? His voice held no accusation, only genuine curiosity. By bringing Crystal into our family narrative, by opening the hidden room, by joining me at the cemetery, aren't you hoping I'll grieve differently? More openly? More healthily? I considered this carefully. I suppose I am. Not because I want to diminish your grief, but because I believe sharing it might ease its burden. I paused. But Margaret made me realize that I don't have the right to dictate how you process your loss, even after 50 years. Arthur reached across the console to take my hand. No, you don't. But you do have the right to ask for honesty in our marriage. And I haven't given you that, not completely. We drove the rest of the way in thoughtful silence, each considering the boundaries of grief, of marriage, of how much we owe others access to our innermost selves, even those we love most deeply. The day after the anniversary, I found myself alone in the house, Arthur having left early for a meeting at the university where he still occasionally lectured despite being retired. I wandered into his study, drawn to the now open doorway that led to Crystal's room. In the weeks since its discovery, the small space had transformed. No longer hidden or secret, it had become integrated into our home. The door left open, items, from inside, thoughtfully displayed throughout the house. Yet the room itself remained a sanctuary of sorts, a quiet place for reflection. I sat in the comfortable chair Arthur had recently moved into the space, thinking about Margaret's words. Had I been too presumptuous in pushing Arthur to share his grief? Was I, as Margaret implied, trying to reshape his relationship with Crystal's memory into something more conventional, more easily understood? The doorbell interrupted my thoughts. Opening the front door, I found Christine standing on our porch, a large cardboard box in her arms. "I hope I'm not intruding," she said, her usual reserve tinged with nervousness. "I found those photo albums I mentioned, and some other things that might have belonged to Crystal." I welcomed her in, calling Arthur to let him know his sister had arrived with important discoveries. While waiting for him to return, Christine and I sat in the living room, the unopened box between us. "I must admit, I'm still processing all of this," Christine said, gesturing vaguely. "Finding out about a sister I never knew existed, realizing my father kept her memory completely hidden from me. It changes how I see my entire childhood." "I can imagine," I said, though in truth, I couldn't fully comprehend the magnitude of such a revelation. "The strangest part is that I'm grieving someone I never met," Christine continued. "Is that possible? To mourn a relationship that never existed?" "I think it is," I replied. "You're mourning the sister you might have known, the relationship you were denied." Christine nodded thoughtfully. "And I'm angry too, at my father for his silence, at Arthur for continuing that silence." She looked around our living room, where several of Crystal's photographs now hung prominently. "Though I'm beginning to understand why he did." When Arthur arrived 30 minutes later, slightly breathless from rushing home, the three of us gathered around the box in Crystal's room. Christine had insisted this was the right place to examine its contents. "I haven't looked through everything," she explained as Arthur carefully lifted the lid. "I wanted us to discover it together." Inside were treasures beyond what any of us had expected. Photo albums from Arthur and Crystal's childhood, containing images Arthur thought had been destroyed. A collection of letters Crystal had written to their father during her first hospital stay. Several notebooks filled with her photography plans and project ideas. And most surprisingly, a small jewelry box containing 2 identical lockets. Arthur opened one with trembling hands. Inside was a tiny photograph of him and Crystal as children, perhaps 5 or 6 years old, faces pressed together, grinning widely. "I gave her this for our 16th birthday," he whispered. "She was wearing it when she died. I thought it was buried with her." "There's a note," Christine said, pointing to a folded paper beneath the second locket. Arthur unfolded it carefully, reading aloud. "For Christine, when she's old enough to know about her sister. With love, Dad." His voice broke. "He intended to tell you. He just never found the right moment." "Or the right courage," Christine added, though without bitterness. For the next 2 hours, the three of us explored the box's contents, piecing together a more complete picture of Crystal's life and the family dynamics before and after her death. Through our father's saved letters and notes, we glimpsed his private struggle with grief. His inability to speak of Crystal contrasted with his unwillingness to erase her completely. "He was so much like you, Arthur," Christine observed, "keeping everything contained, preserved, but hidden away where it couldn't hurt anyone, including himself." As we carefully returned items to the box, setting aside a few photographs to be framed, Christine picked up the second locket. "This was meant for me," she said softly. "After 50 years, I can finally wear it." Arthur helped her fasten it around her neck, the simple gesture bridging decades of disconnection between siblings. As Christine caught sight of herself in the small mirror on the wall, tears welled in her eyes. "Now I'll always carry both of you with me," she said. "My brother and the sister I never knew." Later, after Christine had left with promises to return, soon Arthur and I sat in the kitchen, emotionally drained but peaceful. "I called Margaret," he said unexpectedly. "I told her about the box, about Christine, about how things are changing." "What did she say?" "She said perhaps she'd been too protective of the past, that Crystal would have wanted her memory to bring family together, not keep them apart." He smiled faintly. "She'd like to meet everyone properly, perhaps come for dinner next month." I nodded, surprised but pleased. "I'd like that." "I've been thinking about what you said in the car yesterday," Arthur continued, "about having the right to ask for honesty in our marriage." He reached across the table for my hand. "You do have that right, and while I can't change how I've grieved Crystal all these years, I can change how I share that grief, and my joy in having known her, with you, with our family." It wasn't a dramatic declaration, but in its quiet way, it felt like a profound shift, a new boundary established. Not to separate, but to connect, to include rather than exclude. The ripples of Crystal's rediscovery continued to spread outward, touching lives and relationships in ways none of us could have predicted. The discoveries from Christine's box sparked something new in Arthur, a desire to revisit the past more, directly. One evening, as we sat in the garden watching the sunset, he turned to me with unexpected resolve in his expression. "I want to visit the lake house," he said, "where Crystal and I spent our last summer together." The statement caught me off guard. In 50 years of marriage, Arthur had never mentioned a lake house, had never suggested returning to any location from his past with Crystal. "It still exists?" I asked. He nodded. "It belonged to our uncle. After he died, it passed to my father. Then to me after he passed. I've kept it all these years, paid the taxes, hired caretakers. But I haven't been there since the summer before Crystal died." 51 years, I said softly. "Why now?" Arthur's gaze remained fixed on the deepening colors of the sunset. "In her journal entry that you read when you first discovered the room, Crystal mentioned going to the lake despite the doctor's warnings. That day was significant. It was when she made me promise to live fully after she was gone." He paused. "It was also when I promised myself I would never return there without her." I understood then the magnitude of what he was proposing, not just a visit to a property he owned, but a deliberate breaking of a vow he had made to himself in grief. "Would you come with me?" he asked, finally looking at me. "I don't think I can face it alone." "Of course," I said without hesitation. "When? This weekend?" Before I lose my nerve, we made the 3-hour drive to the lake in relative silence, both of us contemplating what this pilgrimage might mean. The countryside gradually gave way to denser forests, and finally, a turn onto a narrow gravel road brought us to a modest cabin overlooking a small, secluded lake. Arthur sat in the car for several minutes after turning off the engine, his hands still gripping the steering wheel, his gaze fixed on the cabin. I waited quietly, allowing him the space to process whatever emotions were surfacing. "It's smaller than I remembered," he said finally, "but otherwise unchanged." We walked up the path together, Arthur using the key he had carried on his keychain. For 5 decades, but never used. The interior was simple but well-maintained, a testament to the caretakers he had employed over the years. Despite being uninhabited, it didn't feel abandoned. Rather, it seemed frozen in time, waiting. Arthur moved through the space slowly, touching furniture, looking at the few decorative items that remained from his youth. In the main room, he stopped before a stone fireplace where several faded photographs stood framed on the mantel. "These were taken that last summer," he said, picking up one that showed him and Crystal sitting on the dock, fishing poles in hand. Uncle Morris took this the day before we learned her cancer had returned. I studied the image, struck by how carefree they looked, no hint of the devastation that awaited them just around the corner. She loved it here, Arthur continued, replacing the photograph carefully. Even after she got sick the first time, even when she was so weak from treatments she could barely walk, she insisted on coming here every summer. He moved toward the screen door that led to a wide porch overlooking the lake. The last time we were here, she was already declining rapidly. The doctors had advised against the trip, said she should stay close to the hospital, but she was adamant. A small, sad smile touched his lips. She could be tremendously stubborn when she wanted something. We stepped onto the porch, and Arthur pointed to 2 Adirondack chairs positioned side by side facing the water. We sat there on her last night here, talking until dawn. She knew she was dying, even though none of us would say it aloud. He crossed to the chairs, running his hand along the weathered wood of one before slowly lowering himself into it. I took the seat beside him, feeling like an intruder in a sacred space, but also honored to be included in this memory. That night, she made me promise to live a full life after she was gone, Arthur said, his voice barely above a whisper. To fall in love, have children, pursue my career. Everything she wouldn't get to do. And I promised her I would. You kept that promise, I reminded him gently. Did I? He turned to me, his expression troubled. I built a life, yes. Married you, had our children, established my career. But was it really the full life she wanted for me? Always holding part of myself separate, keeping her memory locked away, carrying guilt that colored everything? The question hung in the air between us, unanswerable in its complexity. Arthur stood suddenly, walking to the edge of the porch where steps led down to the dock. Come with me. Together, we walked the weathered wooden planks to the end of the dock where the lake stretched before us, still and reflective in the afternoon light. This is where it happened, Arthur said, his voice stronger now. Where Crystal told me she had turned down the bone marrow transplant. Where I learned that she had chosen my future over her own life. He knelt at the edge of the dock, trailing, his fingers through the clear water. I was so angry with her. I shouted, accused her of giving up, said terrible things I can never take back. His voice broke. And then I left her sitting here alone while I stormed off into the woods to rage against the unfairness of it all. I knelt beside him, placing my hand on his shoulder but remaining silent, sensing he needed to speak the words he had held inside for so long. When I came back hours later, she was still here, waiting, not angry, not hurt by my outburst, just patient, understanding. Arthur drew a shaky breath. She told me she forgave me, that she would always forgive me, for anything. But for 50 years, I haven't been able to forgive myself. In that moment, kneeling beside my husband at the edge of the dock where his life had changed irrevocably, I finally understood the true source of his guilt. Not just that Crystal had refused treatment to protect his future, not just that he had missed her final moments, but that his last significant interaction with her had been anger, words spoken in fear and pain that could never be unsaid. Arthur, I said softly, what would Crystal say to you right now if she were here? His answer came without hesitation. She would tell me I've punished myself enough, that it's time to let go. We stayed at the lake house that night, sleeping, in the small bedroom that had once been Arthur's. The caretakers had maintained the essentials, clean linens, basic supplies, making our impromptu overnight stay possible. Arthur had been reluctant to leave after our conversation on the dock, and somehow staying felt right, a completion of the journey we had begun. In the morning, I woke to find Arthur's side of the bed empty. Following my instincts, I walked down to the dock, where I found him sitting in the gentle light of dawn, a small wooden box beside him. I couldn't sleep, he said as I approached. Too many memories. I sat beside him, pulling my sweater tighter against the morning chill. Good memories or difficult ones? Both. He picked up the wooden box, turning it in his hands. I found this in the storage closet last night after you went to bed. Crystal made it in a woodworking class we took one summer. He opened the lid, revealing a collection of small items: a smooth stone, a pressed flower, a handwritten note, a tarnished coin. Our treasures, Arthur explained. Things we found here over the years that seemed magical or significant. As the sun continued to rise, casting golden light across the still water, Arthur told me stories about each item. The day they found the unusual stone while swimming, the wildflower Crystal had pressed between the pages of her journal, the coin they had discovered buried in the soil near an old tree. We were convinced it was pirate treasure, he recalled, a genuine smile lighting his face. We spent the rest of that summer digging holes all over the property, certain we would find more. The stories flowed more easily than I had expected. Memories untainted by grief or guilt, pure childhood joy shared between twins who had once been inseparable. In these recollections, I glimpsed the Arthur who had existed before loss had reshaped him, before he had built careful structures to contain his pain. Eventually, he fell silent, gazing out across the lake. When he spoke again, his voice was clear and resolute. I've been holding on to guilt that Crystal never wanted me to carry. She forgave me for those angry words before she died. She understood they came from love, from fear of losing her. He closed the treasure box carefully. It's time I forgave myself. From his pocket, he withdrew a small envelope. I wrote this last night. Everything I wish I could say to her now. Apologies, gratitude, all the things I've kept inside for 50 years. He opened the envelope, removing a folded letter. For a moment, I thought he might read it aloud, but instead he carefully tore it into small pieces. I don't need to hold on to these words anymore, he explained, letting the fragments fall into the wooden box. They're between Crystal and me now. Arthur closed the box, securing its simple latch. Then, with a deep breath, he slid it into the water. We watched together as it floated momentarily before gradually sinking beneath the surface, disappearing into the clear depths of the lake. I'm not abandoning her memory, Arthur said, answering a question I hadn't asked. Just releasing. The weight I've carried, the guilt, the regret, she never wanted those for me. As we sat in the growing warmth of the morning sun, Arthur's hand found mine. His grip was different somehow, lighter, yet more present. The change was subtle, but unmistakable. Something long constrained had begun to flow freely again. Thank you for coming here with me, he said simply. Thank you for letting me be part of this, I replied. We remained on the dock until hunger finally drove us back to the cabin. While preparing a simple breakfast, Arthur made an unexpected suggestion. We should bring the family here this summer, all of them, the children, grandchildren, Christine. Make new memories in this place. The changes in Arthur after our return from the lake house were subtle but profound. There was a new lightness to him, as if gravity had slightly loosened its hold. He laughed more easily, spoke more freely, and most noticeably, began referring to Crystal in everyday conversation without the solemn, ritualistic quality that had always accompanied her name before. 6 weeks later, our entire family gathered at the lake house for a long weekend. Our 3 children and their spouses, all 7 grandchildren, Christine and even Margaret, who had become a regular visitor to our home. It was chaos of the most wonderful kind. Fishing expeditions, campfires, swimming, board games played on the wide porch as evening fell. I found Arthur on the dock early one morning, camera in hand. Not Crystal's vintage Nikon, but a new digital one he had purchased specifically for this weekend. I thought I'd try to capture some of this, he explained, gesturing toward the cabin where our family was just beginning to stir. For the next 50 years. The simple statement contained multitudes, an acknowledgement of the past, a commitment to the present, a hope for the future. I sat beside him, watching as he experimented with the camera settings, his natural precision evident even in this new endeavor. "You know what I realized?" he said after several minutes of comfortable silence. "Crystal would have been a terrible photographer in the digital age. She was too impatient, always rushing to see how the images turned out. She would have checked the screen after every shot instead of staying present in the moment." The observation was so unexpected, so ordinary and affectionate and unmarked by grief, that I laughed aloud. "Unlike you, who can wait hours for the perfect light." "Exactly." Arthur smiled, something he did more frequently now. We balanced each other that way. Her spontaneity, my patience. Together, we made one competent person. As the sun rose higher, our grandchildren emerged from the cabin in pairs and trios, some heading straight for the water, despite the morning chill, others sprawling on the porch with books or devices. Our oldest grandson, Jonah, approached the dock hesitantly. "Grandpa? Mom said you might teach me how to use a real camera. If you're not too busy." Arthur's face lit up. "I'd love to. Come sit." He patted the space beside him. "Your great-aunt Crystal taught me everything I know about composition. Let me show you what she called the golden perspective." For the next hour, I watched as Arthur shared Crystal's photography techniques with Jonah, speaking of her with natural ease and genuine joy. There was no weight to her name now, no hushed reverence, just the ordinary pride of one artist describing another's skills. Later that day, as our family gathered for a group photograph arranged by Arthur and Jonah, I observed my husband with new eyes. At 74, he stood straighter than he had in years. The perpetual furrow between his brows, the one I had always attributed to his scholarly nature but now recognized as the physical manifestation of carried grief, had softened. When he smiled for the camera, it reached his eyes fully. After dinner, as twilight settled over the lake, Arthur called for everyone's attention. Standing before the fireplace beneath the faded photographs of his youth with Crystal, he cleared his throat. "I want to thank all of you for coming here this weekend," he began. "This place holds significant memories for me, not all of them easy. For 50 years, I couldn't bear to return because I associated it only with loss. But being here with all of you, seeing new generations enjoy the water, the woods, even the squeaky screen door that still sounds exactly the same, has been transformative." He paused, his gaze moving around the room, meeting each person's eyes briefly. Crystal loved this place because it brought people together. That's what she valued most: connection, joy, living fully in the moment. It took me 50 years to truly honor that part of her legacy, and I'm grateful it wasn't too late. Christine rose from her seat, the locket containing both her siblings' photographs glinting at her throat. She crossed to Arthur, taking his hand. "It's never too late for family," she said simply. On our 51st wedding anniversary, exactly 1 year after I discovered the hidden room and the truth about Crystal, Arthur and I stood together on the bluff overlooking Cedar Grove Cemetery. The morning was clear and bright, autumn leaves creating a vibrant canopy of red and gold above Crystal's grave. We'd come not out of obligation or ritual, but with purpose. In Arthur's hands was a small wooden box, similar to the one he had released into the lake, but newer, crafted by his own hands over the past month. "I think she'd approve," he said, opening the lid to reveal what was inside. The box contained a collection of photographs, Crystal's originals now carefully preserved, in albums at home, but these were new, images from our family weekend at the lake house. Christine showing her grandchildren how to skip stones across the water, our children laughing together on the porch, Arthur teaching Jonah to use a camera. The next generation, learning, living, connecting. "It feels right to share these with her," Arthur explained as he placed the box carefully at the base of the headstone, "to show her that her legacy continues, not just through the Scholarship Foundation, but through our family. I took his hand, noting how different this visit felt from all those that had come before. There was peace here now, not just for Arthur, but for me as well. The woman whose grave I had avoided for 50 years, whose very existence had seemed a threat to my marriage, had become someone I knew, respected, even loved in my own way. As we walked back to the car, Arthur surprised me with a question. "Do you think we would have been friends, you and Crystal?" I considered this carefully. "Not immediately," I admitted. "We're quite different from what you've told me. She was bold, impulsive, artistic. I've always been more practical, more measured." "Like me," Arthur said. "Yes, but I think eventually we would have found common ground. We both love fiercely, protect what matters to us, and we both saw something worth loving in you." He smiled at that, squeezing my hand gently. "Besides," I added, "she wanted you to be happy. Anyone who wanted that for you would have become my ally eventually." As we drove away from the cemetery, the conversation shifted to plans for the coming year. A family Christmas at the lake house, Christine's daughter's wedding in the spring, the Scholarship Foundation's upcoming expansion to include digital media arts. Life continued to unfold, as it always does, but now with a completeness that had been missing before. The ghost who had stood between us for 50 years had materialized into a beloved sister, aunt, friend, someone we could acknowledge, remember, and honor together rather than apart. That evening, as we prepared for our anniversary dinner, the one we had postponed a year earlier, Arthur disappeared briefly into his study. He returned with a small wrapped package. "What's this?" I asked, surprised. We had agreed not to exchange gifts, having decided that the year of truth and reconciliation had been gift enough. "Something I should have given you long ago," he said. Inside, the package was a framed photograph I had never seen before. Crystal standing on the dock at the lake house, camera in hand, laughing at something beyond the frame. Beside it was a smaller frame containing a folded note. "Read it," Arthur encouraged gently. I unfolded the yellowed paper carefully, recognizing Crystal's handwriting from her journals and letters. "Arthur, I took this self-portrait for you to remember me by. Not sick, not dying, but fully alive. This is how I want you to think of me when I'm gone. And when you find someone to love, and you will, stubborn brother, if you'll just let yourself, show her this picture. Tell her I approve, that I'm grateful, that she doesn't need to compete with a memory. Tell her that loving me and loving her were never meant to be separate things in your heart. Live fully, love completely, for both of us." K.I. looked up at Arthur, tears blurring my vision. "You've had this all along?" He nodded, his own eyes damp. "I couldn't bear to read it for years after she died. When I finally did, I still couldn't bring myself to follow her instructions. It felt impossible to integrate these different parts of my life. I kept them separate because I didn't know how to do otherwise." I touched the image of Crystal, this vibrant young woman who had shaped the man I loved so profoundly, whose absence had colored our marriage in ways I was only beginning to fully comprehend. "And now?" I asked. Arthur smiled, the expression reaching, his eyes completely, the way it had begun to do more often in recent months, as if some long-frozen part of him had finally thawed. "Now I understand what she meant. Loving her and loving you were never separate things. They're both part of the same heart, my heart. And keeping that heart divided was never what she wanted for me." He took my hand, leading me toward the door. "Happy anniversary, Laurel. Thank you for 51 years, and for helping me finally fulfill my promise to Crystal. To live fully, completely, with all parts of myself present and accounted for." As we stepped outside into the autumn evening, I realized that after 50 years of visiting his sister's grave, Arthur had finally stopped visiting his first love, because she had never been that at all. She had been his twin, his other half, a profound loss that had shaped him. And in finally understanding who she truly was to him, I had discovered that there had always been room in his heart for both of us. Not as rivals, but as essential pieces of the extraordinary man who had been my husband for half a century, and who, at 74, I was in many ways just beginning to fully know. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.